Welcome. This is Breathe California TV. My name is Terry Trumbull. I'm a volunteer with Breathe California, and each week we try to present a show for you, usually on preventing air pollution or reducing smoking. Today we're talking with Shiloh Ballard. She's both the Deputy Director and Housing Director of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. We're going to talk about how to get more housing, lower housing prices, and reduce air pollution with Shiloh. See you in 30 seconds.
What it feels like to have an asthma attack is, well, you can't breathe and you can't tell anybody that you're having an asthma attack because you can hardly talk. You can maybe say one or two words, but you can't say much else. Breathe California has helped me come in contact with more asthmatics and more people who have the same case as I do. It's important to me because I don't feel like I'm alone in the fight against asthma.
Welcome back to Breathe California TV. I'm Terry Trumbull. I'm the Volunteer Environmental Health Chair, which means preventing damage to your lungs. Breathe California is the lung health organization for California. Last year, just in this county, we helped about 150,000 people with breathing difficulties like asthma or COPD. Today, we're talking with Shiloh Ballard. We're talking about how to prevent lung damage, and much that we talk about you won't even have associated beforehand with air pollution, but Shiloh is going to set us straight. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Terry.
So what does housing have to do with air pollution? Does the location make some difference?
Absolutely. How we build our environment has everything to do with things like whether you're walking, biking, or you're choosing to get in a car and drive everywhere. If we as a community decide that we like sprawl type of development, then that means everybody has to get in their car and drive everywhere. And that creates pollution and particulate matter that contributes then to the problems that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, and that's not even to mention the costs of it. When I was on the County Planning Commission, we had a study that delivering fire and police services to sprawl, meaning houses built anywhere they wanted, was 7 times as expensive if you're doing what we'd call infill development.
Absolutely.
So what is infill development, now that I said it?
Well, very broadly defined, it's anything within our urban growth boundary. But if you more tightly define it, really what we're trying to do through infill is direct more intense development into our more urban areas, so close to retail, close to existing services, close to our transportation and transit infrastructure, stuff that we call transit-oriented development. Build up, not out, so that you take the elevator to work, or you take the elevator to the coffee shop, grab your cup of coffee, walk to the train station, hop on the train, go to work, and you're able to accomplish your daily tasks in a certain perimeter that don't necessarily require an automobile.
So entirely within San Jose, you can catch light rail, go to a spot where you work, or even better, be at where you work, and never need to drive a car?
It can be done. It actually can be done. It may surprise a lot of the viewers, but I'm actually an example of that. A couple of years ago, we intentionally bought a home near the Diridon Station. The Diridon Station is slated to be Grand Central West. It's going to have BART coming through it. It already has Caltrain, ACE, Capital Corridor, light rail, heavy bus hub, and probably some I'm forgetting. The high-speed rail is slated to come through the Diridon Station at some point in time. And if you live in that area, you really can get to most everything without having to get in a polluting automobile. So for example, last night I spent my evening at the Santa Clara City Council meeting, encouraging them to set aside some money for affordable housing. And because the City Hall is only 2 blocks off of El Camino, and I live a couple blocks off of the Alameda, which turns into the El Camino, and the 22 line runs very frequently, I just walk out my door, walk 2 blocks, catch the 22, ride it to City Hall, spend the evening there, and then ride home. It doesn't make
in a completely different city.
Yeah, in Santa Clara, right, right. And if I were to do that same commute in a car, it really wouldn't be much faster, because if you drive down El Camino, it's slow going regardless. You can be in a car, you can be in a bus, you're going to go the same speed.
So a lot of people are worried about using bikes or being pedestrians because everything seems so car-oriented. Can we change that?
Absolutely, we can change that. There will be growing pains along the way, but the city of San Jose and many of the cities in this area have prioritized active transportation. Santa Clara just put in some beautiful, beautiful green bike lanes where you know, the street is actually painted green so that drivers get a visual cue. Everybody gets a visual cue that this is where the bike is supposed to be and this is where the car is supposed to be. San Jose has been doing the same thing with green bike lanes. There's some on Heading, San Fernando. As soon as we start putting in more of this kind of infrastructure, people will feel safer riding a bike. They'll ride more, and it's one of those triple bottom line issues, because not only is it good for the environment, it's good for your own health, and it's also good for your pocketbook.
So I think of North San Jose as an area that was classically built around the car. Beautiful work spots, but rarely more than a story high, enormous parking lots, and a light rail line hardly being used. How do you think that's going to change with a transit-oriented development?
Well, there's a lot of potential answers to that question. We have to make these changes in partnership with the business community and the residential developers and operators of rental properties up there. So, for example, so let me back up a minute. You have the infrastructure changes that need to happen, right? Putting in the bike lanes, making sure light rail functions well so that people feel like they can get to point A and point B in a timely fashion. But you also have the cultural element of things. And actually, a few years ago, I went to the Netherlands for a bike study trip where for a week we went to 4 different cities to study bike policy. You might ask yourself, what could you learn from 4 different, how different could different cities be in terms of bike policy? But these cities are competing with each other to get the most people on bikes. And so you're in the Netherlands, which has a world-class bicycling infrastructure. Everyone bikes. You'd be crazy not to bike. They also have a lot of immigrants that are coming into the Netherlands, and what they found is you can drop someone who has lived outside of the Netherlands into a world-class bicycle infrastructure place, and that person will not ride a bike. So what that says is there is this humongous cultural piece of things. You can have great infrastructure, but you still need to do that programmatic cultural piece that trains people to ride bikes. So first and foremost, we absolutely need to have the infrastructure in North San Jose, but we also need that cultural / programmatic element where the business community, property owners are working with their residents and their employees to encourage them to do something other than drive an automobile to and from work or whatever their trip may be, whether it's going to the grocery store.
So when people get recruited into work here, are they more or less flexible about these attitudes? I would think that it's been happening enough in this area that we are perhaps a little bit more pedestrian bike oriented, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think it's changing over time, and we at the leadership group, my employer, for I don't know how long, very long time, have been working with the business community to do things like provide EcoPass to employees, which is essentially an annual pass, so that it's just a no-brainer, and you don't have to fumble for change in the morning. Now that's changing over time anyway, because we have the Clipper card now. But we've been working with the business community to try to get them to encourage their employees. You have programs like Bike to Work Month, where organizations like the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition partner with the business community to have these company-wide competitions where Cisco's competing against Apple for getting the most people riding bikes and the most miles logged on their bikes. So, you know, we're making those changes over time, those behavioral changes, and people are working together to try to figure out how to do that.
So we're all aware of how expensive housing is in this area. I had a friend named Frank Patitucci who specialized in the 90s and early 2000s in helping people locate homes when they moved here. And he said 25% of them walked away after being offered a job because the housing was too expensive. Is that still an issue?
I don't know about the statistics, but it's certainly an issue. We at the leadership group survey our members at the CEO level on an annual basis, and we ask them a number of questions. And one of those questions is, what are the top impediments to doing business in Silicon Valley? Every year, guess what the number one answer is?
High cost of housing.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. So directly from our CEOs, we hear that their ability to recruit and retain top talent is hampered by high housing costs. So that's why we work on trying to build more. And that's the primary lens that the leadership group sees the issue through is, at the end of the day, supply is not able to keep up with demand. And as a result, we have all sorts of problems around affordability. So,
and that's for both rental and purchase housing.
Yep. And within that framework, we specifically focus on more dense housing because, as I noted before, we need to build up, not out. We're not making any more land, and we need to use our investments in infrastructure more wisely by directing our growth near places like the Diridon station so that, again, people can walk out their front door, hit the coffee shop on the way to work, and just walk there or bike there or take transit.
So you've heard me on a number of occasions refer to the Silicon Valley Leadership Group as an environmental group, yet you're made up of 400 companies and every big company in the area. Is that a characterization that you think is fair or okay?
So, well, what do you mean by yet?
Well, I don't even remember yet.
You know, oftentimes people frame the issues around environmentalism as one of business versus the environment.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely not how the leadership group views things. We come to the table recognizing that for all of these public policy issues, everything's related. It relates to the business's bottom line. It relates to quality of life issues that also relate to the business bottom line. You know, it's important to create a world in which the environment is safe, people are healthy, the economy thrives, people want to live here. I mean, all of this is important in terms of recruiting and retaining top talent.
So for environmental or health groups like Breathe California, in Breathe California's case, infill means that people are close to jobs, driving less. We like less air pollution going out in the air. The local environmental groups like Sierra Club and League of Conservation Voters strongly support, to the amazement of many people in society, infill development because that's what trains, buses, BART, high-speed rail need to be economic. So I've always been comfortable with that designation, and the leadership group is as oriented towards getting clean air as anybody else is in the area.
Right. Well, and when you think about the alternative, what is the alternative? We are growing, and so you could conclude, as I think many environmentalists do, that the solution is we need to stop growing. That's one path to success potentially. But the reality of that path actually coming to fruition is pretty minimal. So if you recognize that we're going to grow, and in fact we're growing as a mutual friend of ours often says LA7SJ2, which means we are every 2 years, the state of California is growing in population size the amount of San Jose's population every 2 years.
Which
we're
is
adding
over 1 million.
Right, we're adding a new San Jose to the state of California, and every 7 years we're adding an LA to the state of California.
Which is 4 million. Pretty amazing.
We're growing. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, if we're growing, if you believe that that's a foregone conclusion, if you're willing to believe that, then you have to ask yourself, how do we do that in the most sustainable and environmentally friendly way that also helps continue to build our economy and our community? And when you ask yourself that question, there are not a whole lot of answers that make sense. And the answers that make sense are the ones that I talked about. It's building up, not out. It's clustering and intensifying development around where we've invested in our infrastructure. It's what we call smart growth and transit-oriented development.
So San Jose's 2-year-old plan for its future is quite a change, and it reflects most of the ideas that you've been talking about.
Absolutely. So I had the pleasure of serving on the San Jose General Plan Update Task Force, and I think it set out when we were appointed to that to be like a less than 2-year process, ended up being a 4+ year process of putting the general plan together. And at the end of the day, really the vision that was laid out in that document, which essentially is the blueprint for how the city is going to grow, was to grow more sustainably in this smart growth, transit-oriented development way, and specifically to create urban villages all around the city. And these are nodes of these pedestrian-friendly, walkable, bikeable communities where in an ideal world you can, like I said before, accomplish everything that you need to do in your daily life in your neighborhood without getting in a car and without the ill effects of an automobile.
Yeah, so talk a little bit more about the urban villages concept. What does that mean, and is every district of San Jose going to have an urban village somewhere?
Yes, the answer is yes. There are, if I remember correctly, 70 urban villages identified in the general plan. These are corridors, they're nodes. For example, one of the first things that needs to happen is the city needs to put plans in place for these urban villages. So they've prioritized what urban villages do they anticipate are going to be developed first. And they'll put money into developing those plans. So the ones that are going first, they're in the process of developing one for the Alameda, one for, and I'm going to get the names wrong of these urban village plans, but I think they're calling it the South Bascom area,
Sure.
And then the San Carlos corridor as well. These are some of the urban villages that are being planned for first. I would say at this point there are general notions about what an urban village should be, but we're all going to need to fumble through this process in figuring out what a plan for an urban village looks like, and then how you actually implement that plan in a way that you're achieving the goals of the community, and also those plans reflect the realities of the market.
So we're talking with Shiloh Ballard of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. We're going to continue talking to Shiloh about both lowering housing costs and improving your health by reducing the amount of air pollution. See you in 30 seconds.
It's given me a chance to get out and be with people who has the same problem, and it helps you to manage your life better too, because you hear different things from each person, and it's just been really helpful in many ways.
Welcome back. This is Breathe California TV. Each week we bring you a program that's focused on preventing damage to your lungs. That really means helping you live longer. Mostly they're air pollution, some on reducing smoking. Today we're talking about a big broad one that affects everybody in San Jose and Campbell, which is how do we lower housing costs and reduce the amount of time that people have to commute to work. So we were talking about urban villages and how widespread there's a hope to be. Let me talk a little bit about an attempt to do something like that, and you can talk about the problems getting approved. I worked very hard as head of a neighborhood association to have an old shopping center. Everything had gone bankrupt. Nobody was going there. And we wanted to put 2 stories of housing above retail markets, wide variety of coffee shops. At the time, video stores were actually a real option to get the needs of people met instead of driving 2 or 3 miles. And the nearby neighbors just went crazy not wanting it. Our neighborhood association represented those people, 5,000 people, and we supported it, but the city council members ran away and hid from this, with the 50 or 60 nearby neighbors not liking it. So how do we cope with that?
So this is the same scene gets played out in every city. You know, at the conceptual level, when you're talking in the abstract, everybody agrees we need more housing. You know, they'll be the first to talk with you about how their kid is living with them now because they can't afford to rent a home, let alone buy a home. And so we need housing, we need affordable housing is something that people easily say. But when you then start to identify a specific location, that's when all that goodwill about housing goes out the window, and it becomes very real for folks. And my conclusion after doing this for years and years and years is that really it's about a fear of change and fear of the unknown. People don't buy a house in a community because they want it to change usually. They buy a house or they live in a community because they like that community just the way it is. So if a developer comes knocking on the door and wants to build apartments or condos or townhomes, especially if that looks different than what they live in, the knee-jerk reaction oftentimes is simply to say no. It's scary, I don't know, you know, there's going to be traffic, the building is going to be too tall, and I'm not going to have the same views that I had. Where are all these people going to park? You know, it's very rare that you have communities welcome a developer with open arms. And that is fundamentally one of the problems. As a result, you know, we had an issue in Palo Alto this last election, Measure D, I believe
Right.
it was now, where there was an affordable housing proposal.
Senior housing even.
For seniors, and that was done very intentionally because the developer listened to the concerns of the community around traffic and school impacts. So they said, okay, seniors drive less and they don't have kids that are going to impact the schools, so we're just going to address your concerns right out of the gate. But at the end of the day, and you know, I'm overgeneralizing, but at the end of the day, folks were very, very concerned about the increase in density. You know, I remember reading an article in the local paper there that was talking about how horrible it was to reduce the setbacks, which is essentially, when you talk about a setback, it's where does the house start?
From 10 feet to 7
right,
or
to the
something.
curb. And you know, you have to ask yourself, what does that translate into in terms of a fear, a real issue? So it's going to be 7 feet instead of 10 feet from the curb. What kind of horrific things is that going to then, you know, what will happen in the community that is so horrific that you have a house up a little closer to the sidewalk and street? I don't know, you know, but those are very real fears and concerns that neighborhoods rightly or wrongly raise, because it's different. It looks different. It's not the single-family detached home that they're accustomed to. It's a smaller lot. It's up closer to the street. It's different looking. So that, you know, Measure D is an example of one of those very, very common instances where the community says, no, we're afraid what this is. We're afraid that the city's growing too fast.
And
You know.
and the nearby opponents convinced all the single-family residents in town that the same thing might happen in their area. So the leadership group started, or at least is a member of a housing coalition that's trying to get housing approved. Talk a little bit about what the group is and what kind of activities.
Right, so the organization's called the Housing Action Coalition. We meet the second Friday of every month. And it's essentially a place where folks who understand that we need housing, and a specific kind of housing, condos, apartments, stuff that tends to be more dense and more affordable just by its very nature, how it's designed. We meet on a monthly basis to stay apprised of what's going on in the housing world. And then the very specific bread and butter activity of the coalition is to identify good housing proposals and to go out and actively advocate for those proposals for the reasons that I was citing before. It's very rare that people are motivated to show up at a city council meeting and tell the council
and be in support of
right,
something.
tell the council that, you know what, I really like what you're doing. People often aren't motivated to do that, but they are motivated when they don't like what the council's doing. So if there's a housing proposal that people don't like, they show up at the city council meeting and they say no. And
so let me interrupt you because we've got about 30 seconds left at this point. Just a quick summary of what you'd like our audience to remember.
So on that final note, what I would say is we are growing. We need to grow sustainably, and it is incumbent upon all of us to look at how we can be a constructive voice in that process and show up at those council meetings and say, this is a good idea, we need to grow in this particular way.
So our guest has been Shiloh Ballard, Housing Director of Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Hope you'll join us again next week.